Sure. So anyway, that guy, you'd say, oh, well, that guy's a war hero. He's a shoo-in. And in Nebraska, everybody knew who he was. But no, Ben Sasse came in. Now, here's the interesting story with Ben Sasse. When he prevailed in this primary, we looked in the New York Times and some other sources in the comment lines, right, the boards, and there we found a woman who said, "Oh, I went to college. No, even I went to high school with Ben Sasse," she said, and Ben Sasse always introduced himself as the 45th president of the United States. That he was going to run as a Republican and become 45th president of the United States. And this takes us back 20, maybe 25 years. And then the same woman, it's only one source, but she claims to be two sources. She says, I had a girlfriend of mine who went to Harvard, and she said that when she got to Harvard for her freshman year, there was this guy there, and he kept introducing himself as the 45th president of the United States, Ben Sasse, Republican. So that may be one source, that may be two, but I think this raises a very interesting question. How many times have we seen these candidates who come out of nowhere and then pick up all the marbles, right? They win. I mean, I'm afraid I have to say Carter is the most obvious, right? And I've written this up. I have a book called Obama, the Postmodern Coup, The Making of a Manchurian Candidate, where I try to show that Carter and indeed Obama are figures of this type. In other words, they are not spontaneous appearances, right? They're not just people who pop into the world. In the case of Carter, as I write in this book from 2008, you have memoirs by Zbigniew Brzezinski. Zbigniew Brzezinski was told by David Rockefeller to create the Trilateral Commission, and he did. And then they were thinking, who could you get for president in 1976? And it's clear what they wanted. They wanted somebody who was not from Washington, who was from a part of the country which was not associated with presidential campaigns. At that time, the South, because there hadn't been a Southern president since, Woodrow Wilson, I guess. From Woodrow Wilson to Jimmy Carter, there really aren't any, I don't think. Something like that, anyway.
Yeah, Johnson's probably the only one that was in the old Confederacy.
Sorry, Johnson.
But I'm not sure he's Southern in the same sense that
Texas
Carter
may
is.
be considered something separate, but
Yes.
basically you're right. No, but it was an unexpected development when it happened. So Carter, as everybody said, right, and I quote some accounts of this stuff at the time. Carter seemed to come out of nowhere, but he had money, he had organization, he had backing. He had the press interested in him, not the others, and then Carter won. And it turned out that I think Carter was a very unfortunate presidency. Like there's affection for Carter now because of his post-presidency, but I think the presidency of Carter was a series of systematic attacks on the Democratic Party base, starting with unions.
Absolutely, right. He had a very liberal Congress, and he fought with them and brought us stagflation.
Good, and appointed Paul Adolph Volcker, who was such a reactionary that Reagan couldn't think of anybody worse, so he kept Volcker, right? So that shows something awful about Carter. And I'm afraid Obama is somewhat similar. Now, we have to
and here we're talking about Geithner or Goldman Sachs people?
Yeah, and my thesis was that Obama was always a creation of Wall Street. And to some degree of the same people, of Zbigniew Brzezinski and of Samuel Huntington. We could add in the meantime that with Clinton himself, Clinton would always say that he had been brought to Washington by Pamela Churchill Harriman.
I thought it was Jackson T. Stevens, the mob out of Little Rock.
No, but you'd have to have somebody of that.
Oh, you mean very early on when he was
to Washington,
boy state and really ambitious with, working as an aide. Sure.
Harriman, Averell Harriman, who had been, it's unfortunate, but Roosevelt had to use such people, right? Envoy to Churchill, envoy to Stalin, Marshall Plan.
And what was their connection to Brown Brothers Harriman?
Well, that Pamela Churchill Harriman. See, the Averell Harriman died in the late 80s, but Bill Clinton was still in time to cavort with him. But Pamela Harriman founded in the 70s already. She founded something called Democrats for the 1980s, and this was an attempt to to pre-select and to elaborate ideologies for these candidacies. Now, who is she? She's the daughter of Sir Winston. Sorry, she married Randolph Churchill,
right,
who was the alcoholic son of Sir Winston Churchill, probably also an alcoholic, but certainly Randolph was. So she's Pamela Digby, married Randolph Churchill. He died. She drifts off, marries Averil Harriman, fantastically rich. He's the owner of Brown Brothers Harriman, right? So he's Wall Street personified.
So, that's the Dulles brothers, that's the Bush family. I mean, they're all there, right, at Brown Brothers Harriman.
But in this case, the thing with Harriman was that he was identified as a Democrat. Most of the others you've mentioned are identified as Republicans, right, for whatever this is.
But aren't they working both sides? I mean, isn't this
the
DLC?
But when you want to elect a president, you've got to have somebody who bears the right, colors, the silks, right, whatever it is. I remember when Clinton was inaugurated president, the next day, the front page of the Washington Post showed Clinton being led in the door of Pamela Churchill Harriman's house by Pam, and she let him in. And this was sort of, he was going to thank her for the fact that he was now president. He made her the U.S. ambassador to Paris, which is the most desirable diplomatic appointment, along with London and Rome, right? That's the best you can do. So Pam. Her thing was also called Pam PAC. That was her political action committee. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is that in certain cases, these people, I think Carter and Obama are the strongest examples. Clinton obviously had a lot of support and could not be considered simply, some governor from Arkansas. But these people are prearranged. And what I'm trying to say is that I think Ben Sasse may now be the possible, probable, or one of the, what can we call them, Manchurian candidacies?
Yeah, the selected, ordained, yes.
Yeah, whatever it is, right? For in this case, for 2016, because if you want to be the 45th president, if that's really what he's been saying all these years, then you're going to have to run in 2016. Now, this would be the fast track of Obama.
Right, 2 years as a senator or so, yeah.
Yeah, the idea is don't spend any time being senator, because the idea of that, of course, this is what Obama expressed around his campaign. If you have to stay in the Senate, you've got to take votes. As soon as you take votes, you make enemies, you acquire a record. This is a liability. Don't do it. Don't, just vote present, and then go out and campaign. So it is theoretically feasible that Sasse could be on the national Republican ticket in 2016 and make that attempt. So the point of all that is we have now a candidate this time running as Tax Wall Street Party, and that's Dan Burdorf, Buhdorf, and in this case it's called danfornebraska.com, danfornebraska.com. He is a fourth or fifth generation Nebraskan, a very fine candidate, and the line is the similar Tax Wall Street Party, but in this case explicitly, this fiscal crisis is due to the free ride given to these parasitical financial interests, and in particular we want to tax derivatives because that's where the money is. Stocks, yes, bonds, certainly, other instruments, other kinds of speculation, but principally derivatives, because that is the biggest amount of money. Once again, $1.5 quadrillion. That means 1.5 thousand trillion dollars of derivatives, and they are, of course, worthless because they're all paper based on paper. So we've got to find some way to drain the swamp of these derivatives. So we just had the newspaper out in North Platte, Nebraska, did a very favorable article. If you're interested in that, take a look at my Twitter feed, Webster Tarpley, on Twitter. I try to put in links to the things that I talk about. You can see me also at tarpley.net, and I have any number of interviews with Credico from New York and Dan Berdoff from Nebraska. And what's going on right now? This is a great chance if you want to get away, right? If you want to plan your vacation. Credico has just about got his signatures for submission next Thursday, I guess it is, or the Thursday of this week, right? That the New York signature gathering is just about coming to an end. But now, this entire month of of July is the signature gathering time out in Nebraska. And actually, I hope maybe Bob, you can suggest some people who are knowledgeable in electoral laws and chicanery, because we're actually thinking that since SAS has gotten so much money from, if you look at SAS's contributors list, it's all banks, out-of-state banks, New York banks, Illinois, Chicago banks, California banks, all these banks, right? And they put a lot of money into them, and I think they don't really want any other challenge. The Democratic candidate is a guy called Domina, who's a labor lawyer. I'm afraid not, rather uninspiring, and no particular ideas of program and stuff like this. So,
well, we got to take a quick break here. I'd like to talk about this in detail. This very important stuff for changing public policy and creating movements in America. So, talktainmentradio.com. Check us out on WCRS FM 98.3. We're going to hear more about taxing Wall Street, the Tax Wall Street Party, with Webster Tarpley coming up next. Talktainmentradio.com, the world's greatest radio. That's radio the way it should be heard. This is Dr. Bob Fitrakis, and you're listening to Fight Back. My guest, Webster Tarpley, making the case while the real battle at this point in history is clearly taxing Wall Street, the Tax Wall Street Party. Webster, welcome back.
Thank you, Bob. I just have a couple of loose ends from the previous half hour.
Sure.
Before further, when I talk about SAS as this neo-Calvinist, neo-Protestant, neo-Lutheran, the other person who has the same profile is this character Bratt, the one who emerged in Virginia and defeated Eric Cantor there with the support of all of these reactionary radio talk show hosts, right? That whole circuit went big for Bratt. So Bratt and SAS are, in terms of this religious ideology, practically the same thing. And they're both, they have these insider profiles, right, of top government officials, and they, SAS has got, Oxford and Harvard and Yale. He's got all this stuff. So I think this is very interesting that actually a network is in operation, and the idea is to try to revive the flagging spirits of the religious fanatics, right, of the Falwell moral majority, whoever they are, and try to get them going again, but now sort of subordinated to these figures that really don't come from them. The other thing to mention is that when you see these, what I call Manchurian candidates, in other words, people who have been chosen by bankers to win, right, and endowed with resources that go far beyond what a normal person would have, they often come in pairs, right? In the case of Carter, we read in the memoirs of Zbigniew Brzezinski that they had a fallback option in case Carter had overdosed, gotten arrested, died, who knows what, nervous breakdown. They had another Southern governor, similar profile. Reuben Askew of Florida was the alternative. I think there was some reason to believe that when they had Obama as a, what can we say, post-racial black candidate, they had Governor Deval Patrick of Massachusetts. Seemed to have the same profile, right? Go to an expensive prep school, get an Ivy League or something similar education, and then go on to to have many doors mysteriously open. In the case of SAS, the spare SAS is thought to be Tom Cotton of Arkansas. Right now running, he's trying to take over the seat of Senator Pryor Arkansas, and this may or may not succeed. But I think the idea is that that's the pairing. But I think also we have now come to such a point of manipulation and meddling and doctoring of this entire process that there may be other banker candidates that are out there. Especially the bankers may not have been able to agree. Maybe there's a disagreement among them, right? Certainly, the Koch brothers, right? Did they agree to SAS? Is that reactionary enough for them, or are they holding out for something else? We don't know that. We'll only know that as time goes on. But I think the important thing about that is once you've got Dan Bergdorf there, he can hold SAS's feet to the fire by exposing him on all these things. Now, what I was talking about was signatures, right? We're getting signatures. So if you've never taken a vacation in Nebraska, now's the time. We have a house in Lincoln, Nebraska. We can put people up, right? You go out there and go to these campaign sites, Motor Vehicle Bureau, Public Library, shopping center, and so forth, and get people to come and sign up. And I hope some of your audience will consider doing this, right? Because it's a way to see what people in a place like this think like, right? To experience the political atmosphere there, and at the same time do something really big and really important, which needs all the help, right? Because we don't have any. This is not a Manchurian operation here. We don't have any bankers. That's the one thing we don't have, right? And I think the program sort of helps to prove it. So that's where we are now, right? Credico should be okay. We hope so. But Dan Bergdorf now has to get on the ballot, and that's in Nebraska, right? The distances are very big. There are 3 congressional districts. One is Lincoln, one is Omaha, and the other one is everything else, right? And that everything else is a big empty area, and the signatures are not so easy to get. So if you've never been to Nebraska, right, it's a very interesting time to do it.
All right. Think about getting signatures. Yeah, let's have some opposition out there. And I think Webster's absolutely right, my guest Webster Tarpley, on these candidates. And it's safe to say all these people come pre-compromised. Is it not?
Let me tell you about that, too. Now, at this point, viewer discretion is advised. Okay? You got to remember now what we're talking about. As soon as we say Nebraska, some people think, clean farmland and corn, and afraid it's not so. There was a huge scandal about 25 years ago, which revolved around something called the Franklin Savings and Loan. And a guy called Lawrence King, who was a rising star as a black Republican in Nebraska, who is the guy who sang the national anthem to open the Republican convention of 1988, I'm pretty sure. So this was somebody who was going places, except he then got involved in a scandal involving the sexual molestation of young children. And there was a scandal that went on for a long time. If you want to look, there are books written about this. I won't go into the details, but what it essentially meant was that a large part of the political establishment of the state of Nebraska, and this, when I say political establishment of the state of Nebraska, what does this include, right? The Strategic Air Command in Omaha, or Berkshire Hathaway with Warren Buffett, and other large important things, somehow were implicated in some terrible scandal. And this, the reverberations of this have gone on, right? One of the main investigators, somebody who had been hired by the state of Nebraska to look into this, a guy called Caradori, was blown up in his airplane with his son. So there's a whole murky past about this stuff. Now, how does this apply to SAS? Well, we should remember 2006, right? For many Republican voters, right, we have to think about their mentality. For them, the thing that led them to drop, to stop supporting Republican congressional candidates was not Bush and not the war in Iraq, but it was Mark Foley. And Mark Foley sending these, obscene emails to the pages. Yeah. And in those days, there was something called the House Page program. The House of Representatives had high school kids who would come in for 6 months or a year, and they would work as couriers and, office boys, office girls for congressmen. And they would live in a couple of dormitories on Capitol Hill, and they were there, right? This was like being in private school, right, boarding school, except that there were proctors, right? They were guardians, essentially, right? People whose job it was to look after them, right? Not just their studies, although that too. They were tutors, and they were given education, but also to watch out that they weren't endangered. And Ben Sasse was one such person, and he was there from, I think we said, from 1997 to 1998. He was getting an MA at St. John's of Annapolis, right, where Leo Strauss had been a teacher, right, the great neocon ideologue. So Ben Sasse was a proctor of the House Page program, and unfortunately his tenure as proctor in the House Page program coincides with the depredations of Mark Foley, who had been elected, I believe, in 1994, came on the scene in 1995, and was in full career molesting by 97, 98. And there was also another congressman, another Republican, Jim Colby, Kolbe, who's the one who took some of the pages on a trip down the Colorado River, I guess it must have been.
Right.
So they were both sneaking into the dorm at night for hanky-panky,
So
and Ben Sasse was one of 4 people whose job it was to make sure that didn't happen. So that means there is a huge question mark over the moral identity of this person. Now, we have other things, though. It's not just one incident, it's a pattern. There was a woman until recently in Nebraska, and part of this is because Wayne Madsen has become interested in Sasse, right? I think he's seen this potential.
I know Wayne.
Right, Wayne was there. Wayne spent about a week or 10 days in Nebraska because Wayne had been interested in the Nebraska scandal that I mentioned with Lawrence King and the Franklin Savings and Loan, and he wanted to update that. And the way to update that is start from Sasse and start looking. In Nebraska, they have a board for the assignment of foster parents. Right? The state board has to approve any placement of foster children in foster homes. Right? So the idea is to make sure that molestation is not going to occur. And there was a woman there by the name of Stitt, S-T-I-T-T. And Mrs. Stitt had this reputation for being extremely strict and extremely conscientious and extremely concerned to make sure that no harm befell these kids. In other words, she was doing her job in an exemplary way. She was fired a short time ago from her job on the basis of a complaint, and the complaint went like this. The complaint came from the Health and Human Services Department at the time when Ben Sasse was the number 3 guy in the department. And the complaint was, Mrs. Stitt, you're a state employee, but you nevertheless attended a political meeting. Therefore, you're fired. And Mrs. Stitt's argument was, wait a minute, the Hatch Act, which is what the accusation was citing, the Hatch Act only applies to federal employees. I'm not a federal employee. I'm a state of Nebraska employee, so leave me alone. Aha, says Health and Human Services, and we're thinking Ben Sasse, maybe. He was there. Wait a minute, you're getting federal money for your board, and therefore you are bound by the Hatch Act, whether you knew it or not, you're fired. So the idea was that one of the main barriers to further tragic tampering with these children was removed, and somehow presiding over all of this was once again Ben Sasse. So there's number 2. And now number 3, Ben Sasse became the head of Midland College, or Midland University, a small, secondary education place in Nebraska. And about 6 months ago, the athletic coach, the athletic director, was arrested for prostituting his student athletes, for sexually abusing them, and for pimping them. So there's the third one. Now, if you think of the third one, right, let's think of the Sandusky case in Pennsylvania. When Sandusky was indicted and jailed, the president of Penn State was long gone, and many top administrators of Penn State were long gone. They were out. They disappeared. But Ben Sasse was never called to account for the hanky-panky by this athletic director. So this indicates a level of covering, right, he's protected by powerful networks, so that when obvious, sort of prima facie cases emerge, nothing happens to Ben Sasse. So the problem there is that could be your next president. I'm sorry. I mean, it's a leap at this point, right? It's a somewhat improbable scenario. But look what we've seen lately, right? In terms of the manipulation of the electoral process. And the other thing that I would point to about this is you don't know anymore how much of the money is foreign money. You have no idea. Because one of the main problems with Citizens United is that it opens the door, sure, to the Koch brothers or to the now late Richard Mellon Scaife or, people of this type, right? George Soros, equally bad in my book. But then what about foreign money? What about, just go down the list.
Do you remember 2000 when there were accusations that both the Chinese and the Japanese, one through the Nippon and the other one through Nippon Keiretsu, were laundering money into both Bush and Gore? And all the evidence suggested it was true.
Right.
that when Gore did meet with these, Buddhist monks and he picked up money, and you remember the connection between, of course, the Bush family and Reverend Moon, right, which, had direct ties to the CIA.
Tong Sun Park.
Oh, they called it
the Moon manager here in Washington.
Right, but they managed to get that called the Koreagate scandal, but it really was a Mooney scandal.
Yes, right. No, Tong Sun Park. It was the Unification Church of Reverend Moon who had made an alliance with the CIA, and that was it. So in this case, though, I think there were lots of stories that foreign money had helped Obama. But now, whatever that was, that's ancient history. Now we have Citizens United, and there could be oceans, vast sums from foreign donors. I think one interesting thing is, I urge people, if you want to see how Washington works, watch the struggle around the Export-Import Bank. The Export-Import Bank is a New Deal Franklin D. Roosevelt institution. It supports about 250,000 U.S. jobs. I think it's absolutely essential. Other countries have, everybody else has one, France, China, Germany, everybody. And theirs are 3, 4, 5 times bigger. So this is a modest institution. We have this guy, Jeb Hensarling of Texas, and the Republican leadership, this guy who just got elected to be the majority leader, right? McCarthy. As soon as the first thing McCarthy did when he got to be majority leader was he flip-flopped. He said, I had been in favor of the Export-Import Bank, and now I'm against it. So how much of that is actual Chinese money? How much of that is French money? How much of that is German money, right? We don't know. And the reason I bring this up is if you look at oligarchies, right, when oligarchies begin to fade and die, one of the things you see is that the foreign influence on the domestic politics becomes great. The classic example is the Polish Republic of the 1700s, when the Polish Parliament of the 1700s had a Russian party, a French party, a Prussian party, an Austrian party, and then maybe others, right? But it was largely divided among foreign interests. Are we there now? We don't know if we're there now. And I would urge, if we have left-wing sociologists listening in, this is what you should study, right? Look into this and watch it. The best way to observe it is this thing about the Export-Import Bank. So there we have it, right? So Sasse, I think, is a dangerous figure. And if you want to have somebody there who's actually going to fight him, and not roll over, right, and not make dirty deals, and not capitulate, Dan Burdorf is your man.
And what party again is he running on?
Tax Wall Street Party. And again, we were on the ballot in New York City last November, Tax Wall Street Party. We got the signatures for Credico, but now this year, it's the interesting calculation is also that in in Nebraska, you may have a better chance as Tax Wall Street Party than you would have as Democratic Party, because the Democratic Party is widely hated, and nobody should be surprised by this, right? When you think about what they've done, right? Look at what they've done with free trade and sending jobs overseas and all the rest of it.
Oh, yeah. Now, we remember that. I think we met, and that was probably the end of my political career back in 1992 when I was Governor Brown's spokesperson at the I just want to remind people of that, Bob, because I have a very fond memory of that. For the audience, Bob and I and one or two other people were at the Democratic National Convention in New York City in the summer of 1992. And at that point, of course, the front runner was Clinton. And if you're ever tempted by Hillary Clinton, maybe you want to think about this. People will remember that Bill Clinton, in order to show that he was a new Democrat and not a New Deal Democrat and not a pro-labor Democrat and not a populist in any way, began scheduling capital executions, right? That is, people died. People went into, I guess, the gas chamber of Arkansas at that time. Most of them were black, and some of them were mentally impaired. In particular, there was one guy, I remember standing outside Madison Square Garden with this sign that just said Barry Lee Fairchild, because that was one prisoner that Clinton wanted to kill as part of his campaign. And indeed, I think we knew a lot about Clinton there. So anyway, the effort that Bob and I and some others made was to circulate a petition to try to force a platform plank debate of the plenum of the Democratic National Committee Convention, the whole thing, right? The entire floor debate. It was the only minority plank until the Clintonistas, began to lie and act ruthlessly and claimed I committed fraud.
Yeah, and this was that the Democratic Party should condemn the death penalty. My God. I'm very happy to say here in Maryland we got rid of the death penalty.
All right.
It was done by a referendum. That's I think something worth doing, right? There's no death penalty here. So that's something. But that could have been the entire Democratic Party could have at least had a chance to consider that, except they wouldn't follow their own rules. So then we went down to Foley Square in downtown Manhattan, and we went to the federal district court, and I'm trying to remember the name of the judge, but I can't remember. Maybe you remember. And not only did we get nowhere, by showing, look, we had all of these validated signatures. The Democratic National Committee sent this woman who threatened that she wanted an evidentiary hearing to evaluate all those signatures, right, which would have taken a long time, right, to do a line-by-line challenge.
Yeah.
And then the judge turned around and threatened our lawyer with Rule 11 sanctions, meaning if you bring in a frivolous lawsuit, the lawyer can also be put in jail. Oh, my God. And then he said, what, you realize that you're tampering with prime time? So that was Bob Petrakis was really the center of that effort. So you got to give thanks for your weekly host here.
All right, and I got a few minutes left here. Tell people where to go to find out about the Tax Wall Street Party.
All right, we have our own Tax Wall Street Party website, but right now I would approach this through these two fine candidates, Dan Burdoff. So danfornebraska.com, and again, that's where you can have, you can go out there and stay in the campaign house, right? And then participate in the signature gathering. But there'll be some activities around that too. I hope to go there myself if I can find a way to do it. What you find is that the fares into Omaha are rather high. It's better to go think about Kansas City, Missouri, probably a better deal, and then take a bus. You can do a whole lot better with that. And then Randy Credico, and again, this is the former right-hand man of William Kunstler, who I think most people have heard of, and that's Credico 2014. That's governor of New York State. So United States Senator from Nebraska, Dan Burdoff, Dan for Nebraska, governor of New York, challenge Cuomo, expose him as a Wall Street puppet, because God is he ever. That's Randy Credico Credico 2014, and there we're going into the campaign phase, right? So obviously, if you can make a contribution there, that's all set up to do that. Then, as far as I'm concerned, right, if you want to read, for example, you want to read what I said about Obama in 2008, comparing him to Carter. That's Obama, the Postmodern Coup, and this is all at tarpley.net, and that's a very active website. There are new things going up there all the time.
All right, our guest, Webster Tarpley, long-time political analyst and activist. He was there. I saw him in 1992. Not afraid to get down in the trenches and do the work. Sometimes the intellectuals
eager to get into the trenches. Just, trying to find the front, trying to make a front.
All right, and you think that a new front is this tax Wall Street party?
Yeah, it is. And again, the one thing, Bob, maybe you think about this. Is there anybody you know who's an expert in election law from Nebraska? And if you could send me such a person, because I think you have a network, right? I think.
Yeah, no, I'll put it out through the election integrity
wonderful
movement. Well, that means the time's up, Webster. Thanks a lot. I appreciate you coming on Fight Back.
I hope to see you soon. I hope to give you a progress report on these guys, or maybe you'd like to have them in person soon.
All right, yeah. Now we'll arrange to get them.
And Burdoff.
Yeah, we'll arrange to get them on the show. Give them each a half hour. Sure.
Okay.
All right, great. Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.